every martial arts system tends to have its own vocabulary, its own way of describing the types of movements that they're doing, the mechanics of those movements, the intention behind those movements. So with the flow combat system, I have certain ways that I describe what we're doing, and again, that would tend to reflect the intention, the energy, the body mechanics, and the angles that we're striking at. So one of the words that I like to use is progression. So a progression, in my mind, is simply a continuous striking in a particular direction. So if we use this model of the clock that we've used before, and we're talking about a vertical line, a horizontal line, a downward 45-degree angle, downward 45-degree angle, all those are different lines which we can build a progression upon. So for instance, if I am doing a downward 45-degree angle, if I'm hitting somebody along that angle and continuing to hit them along that angle, for instance, maybe from the first form, this overhand hammer fist that's got a whip-like motion to it, if I'm hitting 1, 2, 3, and I continue to hit somebody, starting hitting their head and driving them down at that 45-degree angle, that would be a progression at a downward 45. So I could build into that with the intention of actually driving them all the way into the ground. So that would be a kind of a pure progression, we would call it. Now there would be elements within that where we're using other energies or other concepts, but the intention is to continually drive in a certain direction. Now, what if this person's energy changes? Meaning, what if I'm hitting him downward and he actually can take a really hard punch and he turns and comes back at me this direction? Well, then we simply adapt to that. We adapt to that new attack and we adapt to that energy. And that's one of the things that I really like about this system, is that there's so much versatility to it. So as I'm hitting downward and now suddenly he's charging me this way, of course I'm going to use my footwork. Maybe I'll do my clearing with an eye jab, something like that. Or maybe I'll simply go from my strike here to then passing this way. And now I'm striking at a downward 45 going the other direction. So it allows me to use this versatility of both the footwork and the handwork and that whole circular map that I've given you in order to adapt. So that gives me a lot more variation and much more of an upper hand in an altercation. So that's one way to think about a change in progression. Another way to think about a change in progression would be something that I intentionally want to do in order to either inflict more impact or change the way the other person is moving in response to my impact. So, for instance, I could start with maybe that blocker and a downward 45-degree angle, and as their head comes down, I throw in an uppercut, and now I start a vertical progression where I'm continually working these vertical strikes as I'm coming in. And then maybe their head is coming back, and then I decide I want to take their head to the side. Maybe another opponent's coming in from over here. So I just hit. I spin their head, their body has to follow, and then I'm into a horizontal progression. So this is an idea, a way of thinking that you can start to use in order to work with your progressions. You start to work a particular line with both hands, and you can use the movements from the ball, because that really helps as well to get used to, you know, if I'm coming upward 45, you know, my hands are, one hand's going to strike here, the next hand's going to strike here. You can start to work with these progressions in a particular direction and then change it. Imagine in your mind's eye, this is really the essence of shadow boxing, is imagining in your mind's eye, as I do this, what if? What if they change the direction? What if they charge at me this way? What if they try and grapple? What if a hook comes? Then what would I do? So that way you can start to shift your progressions and continually build and adapt to the situation at hand. You can also think about how you might want to move the other person, as I illustrated before, with shifting from the downward 45 into a vertical progression going upward. So that's one way to look at progressions. That's how I think about them. Now, I also talk about flow, as in flow combat system. So the idea behind flow is that it's a combination of progressions and some of these other energies that and concepts that I'll describe in just a moment. But flow also incorporates the idea that with every strike, I'm moving the body in a certain way that it exposes an ideal target for me. And it actually makes it easier for me to inflict damage on that target because of the direction the body's going. So let's say, for example, maybe I do my clearing, this first movement out of the first double hand form. So somebody comes in with a punch, boom, I get that little eye poke there, and then I hit them on the side of the head, do a nice good hit, and then from there, maybe I come with an uppercut, or maybe I come with a reverse hammer fist, but I drive the head upward. So I've poked them in the eye, the head turns to the side, makes it hard for them to see the second strike, which comes right behind that, hits them in the side of the head. Now the body's going this way, and then I add in an uppercut. Now that uppercut's going to make the head come up. So I move their head to the side so that they couldn't see that second shot. So I'm doing this so that I can get my shot in, a powerful shot, without them detecting and blocking. And then I'm following it up with a punch that's going to lift their chin up. And as their chin comes up, it's going to expose their throat. So I lift it up here as I come with my uppercut, and then from there I'm going to slice horizontally, bam, across with a knife hand, right across the throat. Now the body's natural response to any kind of pain is for the musculature to tighten up, to try and protect your nervous system and your skeletal system. So, bam, I do that shot across, now the chin comes down. So as the chin comes down, it exposes more of the head, more of the face. So I might go from that position there to then a downward strike with either hand, doing this downward raking motion, again, out of the first form, and I might hit him right on the third eye or the bridge of the nose to break the nose, third eye to knock out. So this gives you an idea of how I'm now ping-ponging the person's body around at will, so that I'm constantly opening up new targets and make it much, much easier, make it easier for me to inflict pain, which means less energy expenditure on my part, as opposed to force meeting force and driving against their energy and trying to exert my will on top of theirs. Instead, I'm either flowing with it, or I'm setting up my next shots, as they would kind of call it in boxing and this sort of thing. So within that, well, I might incorporate some other concepts. Some of these concepts, for instance, one that I would call addition, would be if a person's coming toward me, their energy, their intention's already coming at me. If I add to that forward momentum, I might do this block here, and I might jerk on the back of the neck, helping them along their way that they already created, and adding to the energy they created. One, I might add a hammer fist to the back of the neck from there, and then maybe a chop from there, and maybe an elbow from there. So addition simply means that I'm adding my energy, my strikes, in a progression that follows their original intention of movement, the original attack coming toward me. So that's addition. We might also use something called collision. So collision would simply mean that a person's coming maybe toward me, and I might add to that. So maybe that person's coming in on me, and I might get my little eye jab and then hook the back of their head, and I might yank on the neck as I, bam, drop in with an elbow on them. So that, boom, that hard elbow strike, I'm holding their head in place so that the impact is felt really deeply within the skull. So that's collision, just like a car crash. Two cars coming opposite directions, bam, and they hit into each other. So that's collision. Now a slight variation of that would be whiplash. If I'm doing something very similar, I yank on the neck, but instead of yanking on the neck and holding the head there, I yank on it, snap the head forward, and then drive in with my elbow. Now I'm creating whiplash because their head snaps forward, runs right into the next obstacle, and it snaps it back. So now I'm affecting the neck, I'm affecting the joints in the neck. Another concept would be shearing. So shearing is where I'm taking one part of the body one direction, another part another direction. So coming off the same example of me doing my pass here with the eye jab, and then I might grab their arm, and I might turn suddenly and yank their body one way as I drive up and knock their head or into their throat the opposite direction along this diagonal line here. So coming here and bam here, and this is an example of opening, right? Opening and closing, we talk about those energies, rising and falling. So those are expressed within these different types of movement. So these are some examples of concepts and how they're actually applied. Another one that we talk about in a lot of the martial arts is adhesion, or stickiness, say in Wing Chun. And that would simply mean that when somebody goes to throw a punch, when I make contact, I feel through that contact where that person's going, and then I would adapt my reaction to that. So it allows me to feel the person's intention before they're actually able to land a shot. So it gives me that split-second reaction to counter or to create my own progression based on what I'm feeling from them. So there are a lot of different, obviously, vocabulary words as well as concepts that are involved in this art. And we haven't even gotten into some of the different controls of the foot and raking and sweeping and such, pinning, this sort of thing. So we'll talk more about that later, but this gives you something to start with, to start thinking about as you start to work with these different angles of attack, progressions, reversing them, creating collision, or creating some sort of shearing, sort of striking, or something along those lines.